Every morning, millions of people begin their day not with peace, not with clarity, but with pressure. Before the sun has fully risen, the mind is already running. The alarm explodes into the silence of the room. The body wakes with tension instead of freshness. The phone immediately demands attention. Messages begin arriving, schedules appear in the mind, and within only a few minutes, the nervous system is already accelerating towards stress. Then comes the commute. Engines roaring. Endless lines of vehicles. Crowded trains. Motorbikes weaving through narrow spaces. Horns echoing from every direction. People checking the time again and again with growing anxiety. Faces tight with frustration. Minds already exhausted before the real workday has even begun. What is remarkable is that most people no longer even question this condition. The morning rush has become so normal that humanity accepts inner chaos as simply part of modern life. People say, "That's just how mornings are." But if we look carefully, something very important is happening during these hours. The commuter rush is not merely a transportation problem. It is a psychological and spiritual mirror. It reveals the true condition of the human mind. A person may believe they are calm, patient, and balanced while sitting peacefully at home. But place that same person in heavy traffic when they are late for work, and suddenly irritation appears. Anger appears. Fear appears. Impatience appears. The mind tightens instantly. This is why ordinary daily life often reveals more truth about our consciousness than special spiritual moments do. Anyone can appear peaceful under comfortable conditions. The real question is, can peace survive pressure? Can awareness survive noise? Can mindfulness survive speed? The Buddha often taught that suffering does not come from the external world alone, but from the mind's relationship with the world. Traffic itself is not suffering. A crowded train is not suffering. A delayed bus is not suffering. Suffering begins when the mind resists reality. The moment the mind says, "This should not be happening," tension is born. The moment desire collides with reality, agitation begins. We want the road to move faster. We want people to behave differently. We want conditions to obey our preferences. And when life refuses, the mind becomes disturbed. This is why two people can experience the exact same traffic jam while living in completely different inner worlds. One person becomes furious, restless, and mentally exhausted. Another remains calm, observant, and emotionally balanced. Externally, the conditions are identical. Internally, the experience is completely different. The difference is not the traffic. The difference is consciousness. Modern society has trained people to move fast externally, but very few know how to remain still internally. Human beings have learned how to build faster cars, faster trains, faster communication systems, and faster technologies. Yet the mind itself has become increasingly unstable. Even when the body is sitting still inside a vehicle, the mind is racing uncontrollably through worries, fears, plans, memories, frustrations, and imagined futures. During the commute, most people are not truly present. Physically they are on the road, but mentally they are already inside tomorrow's problems. This constant mental acceleration slowly damages inner balance. People arrive at work already irritated, already emotionally depleted, already carrying invisible stress accumulated from only 1 hour of unconscious mental reaction. Then that agitation spreads into conversations, decisions, relationships, and eventually into the entire structure of daily life. A restless morning becomes a restless day. A restless day becomes a restless life. But what if the commuter rush itself could become part of spiritual practice? What if traffic became training? What if every red light became a reminder to breathe? What if every delay became an opportunity to observe the mind? What if the morning commute was not an obstacle to mindfulness, but the exact place where mindfulness becomes real? This is the meaning of what we may call high-speed mindfulness. Not mindfulness inside a silent retreat hall. Not mindfulness only during meditation sessions. but mindfulness in motion, awareness in noise, calmness inside pressure. The ability to maintain internal equanimity while the external world moves with enormous speed. Because true mindfulness is not fragile. True mindfulness does not depend on silence. If awareness disappears the moment conditions become difficult, then awareness has not yet matured. Real inner stability must be able to survive movement, uncertainty, irritation, and unpredictability. Otherwise, peace becomes merely temporary comfort rather than genuine understanding. The morning commuter rush may appear ordinary, but spiritually it is one of the most revealing environments in modern life. It exposes attachment to control. It exposes unconscious habits. It exposes emotional dependency on external conditions. Most importantly, it reveals how quickly the human mind loses itself when pressured by time, speed, and expectation. Yet hidden inside this daily chaos is also an extraordinary opportunity. Every single commute offers a chance to wake up. Every moment of frustration becomes a chance to observe craving. Every moment of impatience becomes a chance to understand the mechanics of suffering directly within one's own experience. In this way, the road itself becomes a teacher. And perhaps this is one of the deepest truths of spiritual life. Awakening does not begin far away from ordinary existence. It begins exactly where we are. In the middle of noise. In the middle of stress. In the middle of crowded streets and restless mornings. Because if a human being can discover stillness there, in the heart of movement itself, then that stillness is no longer dependent on the world. It becomes something far deeper, something unshakable. One of the most important things to understand about the human mind is that it does not become disturbed only because of difficult situations. The deeper truth is that the mind becomes disturbed because it constantly demands reality to be different from what it is. This tendency is usually invisible during calm moments, but during the morning commuter rush, it becomes extremely clear. The road becomes a stage where the hidden habits of the mind reveal themselves openly. The moment a person leaves home, the mind immediately begins creating expectations. Traffic should move smoothly. The train should arrive on time. People should drive properly. Nothing should delay me. Without realizing it, the mind creates an imaginary version of reality that it wants the world to obey. But life rarely obeys perfectly. A red light appears. Someone drives slowly. A bus is delayed. A pedestrian crosses unexpectedly. And instantly, irritation arises. What is fascinating is how quickly the emotional reaction happens. Often within less than a second, the body tightens, the jaw hardens, the breathing becomes shallow, and thoughts begin accelerating. Yet most people never pause long enough to observe this process directly. They simply become the reaction itself. Anger appears, and immediately the mind says, "I am angry." Stress appears, and immediately the person feels trapped inside it. There is no space between awareness and emotion. This is how unconscious living operates. The external event happens first, but suffering does not truly begin until the mind starts resisting the event internally. Traffic is slow, and the mind says, "This is terrible." The line is long, and the mind says, "I hate this." Someone behaves rudely, and the mind immediately creates blame, judgment, and hostility. The suffering is amplified not by the situation itself, but by the psychological commentary continuously added onto the situation. The Buddha described this process with extraordinary precision. He taught that contact with the world creates feeling, feeling gives rise to craving or resistance, and craving then becomes attachment, emotional struggle, and suffering. This process happens so quickly that most people never see it. But the commuter rush exposes it clearly because the mind is under pressure. Under pressure, hidden mental habits become visible. And perhaps one of the strongest habits of the modern mind is the obsession with control. Human beings want life to move according to personal preference. They want certainty, predictability, efficiency, and convenience. But the road teaches a completely different truth every morning. You are not in control of everything. You cannot control traffic. You cannot control weather. You cannot control delays. You cannot control the emotional state of thousands of strangers around you. Yet the mind keeps fighting reality, as though resistance itself will somehow force the universe to obey. This internal battle drains enormous energy. A person may spend an entire commute physically sitting in a car, but mentally they are fighting the world non-stop. Fighting time. Fighting conditions. Fighting uncertainty. Fighting inconvenience. And the tragedy is that most people do this so automatically that they no longer realize how exhausted their own minds have become. The speed of modern life intensifies this condition even further. During the commuter rush, the mind rarely stays with what is actually happening in the present moment. Instead, it races endlessly into the future. What if I arrive late? What will my boss think? I still have so much work to finish. What if the meeting goes badly? The body may be driving on one road, but the mind is traveling through dozens of imagined futures simultaneously. At other times, the mind moves backward instead of forward. A memory returns. An old argument replays. Regret surfaces. Resentment resurfaces. The commuter rush becomes filled not only with physical movement, but with psychological noise. The external traffic is heavy, but the internal traffic is even heavier. This is why people often arrive at their destination feeling strangely depleted even when nothing physically difficult has occurred. They have not carried heavy objects. They have not climbed mountains. Yet mentally, they have been running continuously. The nervous system has remained trapped in reaction, anticipation, and emotional tension for an entire hour. Modern exhaustion is often less physical than psychological. And once this reactive momentum begins, it feeds itself. One irritated thought creates another. One moment of impatience spreads into the next. A driver cuts someone off, and suddenly the mind builds an entire emotional narrative around the event. Anger grows. Self-righteousness grows. Anxiety grows. The mind accelerates like a vehicle with failing brakes. This is what we may call mental momentum. Once emotional reactivity starts moving, it tends to continue automatically unless awareness interrupts it. Without mindfulness, the mind becomes mechanical. It reacts according to habit patterns formed over years of conditioning. Honking creates irritation. Delay creates anxiety. Crowds create impatience. The person no longer chooses consciously. The reactions simply happen. This is why mindfulness is not merely relaxation. Mindfulness is interruption. Mindfulness breaks unconscious momentum. It allows a human being to observe mental processes before becoming imprisoned by them. The moment awareness appears, something profound changes. Instead of instantly becoming anger, one begins observing anger. Instead of drowning inside stress, one begins noticing stress as an experience arising within the mind. This small shift changes everything. Because the moment observation appears, freedom begins appearing too. Most people believe the commuter rush causes suffering. But in reality, the commuter rush reveals suffering that already exists within the mind. The road simply exposes the instability that was always there beneath the surface. If the mind loses peace so easily because of a delayed train or crowded intersection, then the deeper issue is not the world itself, but the fragility of inner balance. And this realization is not pessimistic. It is deeply liberating. Because if suffering were created entirely by external conditions, then peace would always remain dependent on controlling the world. But if suffering is deeply connected to unconscious reaction, then transformation becomes possible even before external conditions change. The traffic may remain chaotic. The crowds may remain noisy. The schedules may remain demanding. But awareness creates the possibility of living differently within the same conditions. This is where mindfulness stops being a philosophical idea and becomes a living practice. Not far away from ordinary life, but precisely in the middle of it. Once a person begins to understand how suffering is created during the commuter rush, the next question naturally becomes, How can mindfulness actually be practiced in the middle of movement, noise, pressure, and speed? Many people imagine mindfulness as something delicate that can only exist in quiet rooms, meditation halls, or peaceful retreats far away from ordinary life. But true mindfulness is far more powerful than that. True mindfulness is not dependent on silence. It is the ability to remain awake within reality exactly as it is. The first thing to understand is that mindfulness during the commuter rush does not require stopping the external world. The cars do not need to disappear. The crowds do not need to become silent. The schedules do not need to slow down. What changes is not necessarily the environment, but the relationship between awareness and the environment. This is extremely important because many people spend their entire lives waiting for ideal conditions before allowing themselves to feel peaceful. They say, "I will relax when traffic improves. I will be calm when life becomes easier." But life rarely becomes permanently calm. If peace depends entirely on external conditions, then peace will always remain fragile. Mindfulness begins the moment a person remembers to return to direct experience. During the commute, the simplest doorway back to awareness is often the breath. In the middle of stress, breathing becomes shallow and unconscious. The body tightens automatically. But the moment one consciously notices a single breath, something begins changing immediately. A small space opens between awareness and reaction. A person sitting in heavy traffic can suddenly become aware of inhaling deeply and exhaling slowly. Nothing outside may have changed at all, yet internally the mind is no longer moving completely unconsciously. The breath becomes an anchor. Not an escape from reality, but a way of stabilizing oneself within reality. Even one conscious breath at a red light can interrupt the emotional momentum that was building only seconds before. And this is the deeper power of mindfulness. It interrupts automaticity. Normally, irritation appears and instantly controls the mind. But when awareness enters, reaction slows down. One begins noticing the physical sensations of stress instead of immediately becoming consumed by the story around the stress. The tightness in the chest becomes visible. The tension in the shoulders becomes visible. The rapid thinking becomes visible. Awareness transforms unconscious reaction into observable experience. This practice can continue throughout the entire commute in very ordinary ways. While standing on a crowded train, one can notice the pressure of the feet touching the floor. While waiting at an intersection, one can observe sounds arising and disappearing without mentally fighting them. The horns, engines, conversations, footsteps, and announcements continue appearing, but mindfulness learns to hear without resistance. Sound becomes simply sound. Movement becomes simply movement. Most suffering during commuting does not come from sensory experience itself, but from the mind's constant commentary about sensory experience. The noise is not the deepest problem. The resistance to noise is the deeper problem. The delay is not the deepest problem. The mental war against delay is the deeper problem. Mindfulness begins dissolving this unnecessary conflict. One of the most transformative realizations is that external speed does not require internal speed. The world may move rapidly, but awareness itself can remain steady. This is a completely different way of living. Normally, when the environment becomes fast, the mind becomes fast as well. Thoughts race. Emotions intensify. Attention fragments. But mindfulness allows the body to participate in movement without forcing consciousness into agitation. A person may walk quickly through a crowded station while remaining inwardly calm. A driver may navigate busy streets while internally balanced. The body moves according to practical necessity, but the mind no longer needs to imitate the chaos surrounding it. This is the beginning of internal equanimity. Another powerful practice is learning to use irritation itself as a reminder to wake up. Usually people view interruptions as enemies. A traffic jam ruins the morning. A long line becomes a problem. But mindfulness reverses this perspective completely. The difficult moment itself becomes the bell of awareness. The moment frustration appears, it becomes a signal to return to observation. A horn sounds loudly. Instead of immediately reacting with annoyance, awareness notices irritation arising. A train delay occurs. Instead of unconsciously feeding impatience, one observes impatience as a changing mental state. In this way, the commuter rush becomes a training ground for consciousness. Every inconvenience becomes an opportunity to strengthen mindfulness. This does not mean suppressing emotion or pretending to be peaceful artificially. Mindfulness is not emotional repression. If anger appears, mindfulness honestly recognizes anger. If anxiety appears, mindfulness recognizes anxiety. But there is a profound difference between observing an emotion and becoming completely identified with it. Normally the mind says, "I am angry." But mindfulness begins seeing more clearly. Anger is appearing within awareness. Stress is appearing. Impatience is appearing. These states arise temporarily, remain for some time, and then eventually fade. They are experiences moving through consciousness, not permanent identity. This insight weakens emotional attachment. The mind no longer needs to cling to every reaction as though it defines the self. A person can experience irritation without being consumed by irritation. One can experience stress without drowning inside stress. Awareness creates space, and within that space freedom becomes possible. Compassion also becomes an essential part of mindfulness during the commuter rush. It is easy to become trapped inside personal frustration and forget that everyone around us is struggling in different ways. Every driver rushing aggressively may be carrying invisible fear or pressure. Every exhausted face on the train may be fighting private suffering unknown to others. Every impatient person is seeking happiness while unconsciously creating more tension. The moment compassion appears, irritation weakens. Instead of viewing others as obstacles, one begins seeing shared humanity. The commuter rush stops feeling like a battlefield filled with enemies and becomes a collective expression of human struggle. This shift softens the heart naturally. Over time, these small moments of awareness begin transforming the entire experience of commuting. The road remains the same, but the consciousness traveling the road changes completely. What was once wasted time becomes practice. What was once daily stress becomes daily training. The commute itself becomes meditation in motion. And perhaps this is one of the most beautiful aspects of mindfulness. It does not require escaping ordinary life. It reveals that awakening can begin exactly in the middle of ordinary life. Not someday in the future. Not only in sacred places. But here, now, inside traffic, noise, movement, and uncertainty. Because every moment contains the possibility of awakening if awareness is present enough to see it. One of the deepest misunderstandings about peace is the belief that peace means the absence of difficulty. Most people imagine that inner calm can only exist when life becomes quiet, organized, predictable, and comfortable. They believe peace is something fragile that disappears the moment pressure appears. But true equanimity is something entirely different. Equanimity is not the removal of chaos from the external world. It is the ability to remain inwardly balanced while chaos continues to exist. This distinction changes everything. Because if peace depends completely on external conditions, then human beings will spend their entire lives chasing control. They will constantly try to organize the world into perfect arrangements. They will seek ideal schedules, ideal environments, ideal people, ideal circumstances. Yet life refuses to remain stable for very long. Traffic returns. Delays return. Uncertainty returns. Illness returns. Loss returns. Change never stops moving. The commuter rush becomes such a powerful spiritual metaphor precisely because it reflects the true nature of existence itself. Life is movement. Life is unpredictability. Life is interruption. Conditions continuously arise and disappear beyond personal control. And the human mind suffers deeply when it expects permanence from an impermanent world. This is why the practice of internal equanimity matters so profoundly. Equanimity is not emotional numbness. It is not pretending that stress does not exist. It is not passive resignation. Real equanimity is clarity without collapse. It is emotional balance without suppression. It is the capacity to experience life fully without being psychologically thrown around by every changing condition. Imagine two people standing in the same crowded station during the morning rush. The same noise surrounds both of them. The same pressure surrounds both of them. Yet, inwardly they live in entirely different realities. One mind is agitated, contracted, impatient, emotionally exhausted before the day has even begun. The other mind remains grounded, observant, spacious, and calm despite the surrounding movement. Externally, the world is identical. Internally, the quality of consciousness changes everything. Modern culture rarely teaches this kind of inner stability. In fact, modern society often glorifies the exact opposite. Speed is praised. Urgency is admired. Constant stimulation is normalized. People are taught to measure their worth through productivity, efficiency, and endless activity. The nervous system remains permanently overstimulated, and eventually people begin mistaking agitation for normality. This is one of the hidden tragedies of modern life. Human beings have become so accustomed to mental noise that silence feels uncomfortable. Many people no longer know how to sit quietly without immediately reaching for distraction. The mind has become addicted to movement, even while waiting at a red light for only 30 seconds. Countless people instinctively reach for their phones because stillness itself has become difficult to tolerate. But a mind trained only in speed gradually loses the ability to rest deeply. And this affects far more than the commute. A restless mind enters relationships. A restless mind enters conversations. A restless mind enters sleep. Even when external activity stops, the inner momentum continues moving. Thoughts continue racing. Anxiety continues circulating. Emotional tension remains trapped inside the body. This is why inner equanimity cannot simply be postponed until later. Many people secretly believe, once my life becomes less busy, then I will become peaceful. But the mind does not suddenly transform itself through waiting. A mind repeatedly trained in irritation becomes more easily irritated. A mind repeatedly trained in impatience becomes more impatient. Every reaction strengthens conditioning. At the same time, the opposite is also true. Every moment of mindfulness strengthens awareness. Every moment of patience strengthens stability. Every moment of conscious breathing weakens unconscious momentum. Small moments repeated daily slowly reshape consciousness itself. This is why the morning commute matters more than people realize. Spiritually speaking, it is not merely a temporary inconvenience between home and work. It is daily conditioning. Each morning the mind practices something. The only question is whether it practices agitation or awareness. A person who spends years reacting unconsciously during every commute is gradually training the mind toward deeper restlessness. But a person who uses those same moments to cultivate observation, patience, compassion, and balance is slowly building a completely different inner life. Over time, the effects become enormous. And perhaps this reveals one of the deepest truths of Buddhist practice. Liberation is not found by escaping ordinary conditions, but by transforming one's relationship to ordinary conditions. The road itself becomes part of the path. The crowded train becomes part of the path. The stressful morning becomes part of the path. Nothing needs to be rejected. Everything becomes material for awakening. This understanding removes the illusion that spirituality belongs only to monasteries, retreat centers, or isolated moments of meditation. Real spiritual maturity reveals itself in ordinary life. It reveals itself in traffic jams. It reveals itself in unexpected delays. It reveals itself in the ability to remain kind while under pressure. Because wisdom that disappears under stress has not yet fully matured. There is also something profoundly beautiful about discovering stillness within movement itself. Normally people think stillness can only exist when everything becomes quiet externally. But true stillness is internal. It is possible for the body to move quickly while awareness remains calm. It is possible for noise to exist without becoming internal noise. It is possible for uncertainty to exist without destroying psychological balance. The image of a calm human being sitting peacefully in heavy traffic may seem small and ordinary. But spiritually it represents something extraordinary. It represents freedom from complete dependence on conditions. It represents a consciousness no longer enslaved by every external event. It represents the beginning of true inner independence. And this independence is deeply important because life itself will never stop changing. There will always be pressure somewhere. There will always be uncertainty somewhere. If peace depends on controlling all conditions perfectly, peace will remain impossible. But if peace can exist in the middle of imperfection, then peace becomes real. This is the deeper meaning of equanimity. Not escaping life, but learning how to stand steadily within life. Not eliminating movement, but discovering stillness at the center of movement. Not waiting for the world to slow down, but awakening inwardly even while the world continues rushing endlessly forward. At the end of all of this, perhaps the most important realization is that the morning commute is never just a commute. It is never merely the distance between one location and another. Every single morning, whether consciously or unconsciously, people are shaping the condition of their own minds. The road is not only carrying the body toward work. It is also training consciousness itself. Most people spend these moments mechanically. They wake up already tense, rush through the morning unconsciously, react automatically to traffic, carry irritation into the workplace, and repeat the same psychological cycle day after day for years. Slowly, stress becomes identity. Agitation becomes personality. Inner restlessness begins feeling normal simply because it has been repeated so often. But mindfulness offers another possibility entirely. It reveals that even the most ordinary parts of life can become part of awakening. The commuter rush, which many people see only as wasted time, can become a daily meditation hall. The traffic light becomes a reminder to breathe. The crowded train becomes an opportunity to practice patience. The stressful moment becomes an invitation to observe the mind instead of blindly obeying it. This transformation does not happen all at once. Inner balance is not achieved through force. It develops gradually, moment by moment, through repeated awareness. One conscious breath today. One moment of non-reaction tomorrow. One small act of patience during a difficult morning. These moments may appear insignificant, but spiritually they are extremely powerful because they interrupt unconscious living. Many people imagine spiritual practice as something distant from ordinary life. They believe awakening belongs only to monks, retreats, mountains, temples, or long meditation sessions. But the deeper truth is far simpler and far more demanding. Spiritual practice begins exactly where unconsciousness usually dominates. It begins in irritation. It begins in stress. It begins in moments where the ego wants to react immediately. This is why the morning commuter rush can become such a profound teacher. It exposes the mind honestly. A person sitting peacefully alone in silence may believe they understand mindfulness. But place that same person in heavy traffic while late for an important meeting, and suddenly the real condition of the mind becomes visible. This is not failure. This visibility is part of awakening itself. Because one cannot transform what one refuses to see. The road teaches humility. It reveals how fragile emotional balance can be. It reveals how quickly craving, resistance, fear, and frustration arise under pressure. But at the same time, it also reveals the possibility of freedom. Because every moment of awareness weakens unconscious conditioning. Every moment of observation loosens identification with emotion. Every moment of returning to the present strengthens inner stability. Over time, something beautiful begins happening. The external world may remain noisy, but internally the mind becomes less noisy. Situations that once triggered intense frustration begin losing their power. Delays no longer feel catastrophic. Waiting no longer feels unbearable. The nervous system slowly learns that peace does not require perfect conditions. And perhaps this is one of the greatest forms of freedom a human being can discover. To remain inwardly balanced while the world continues changing. To breathe calmly while surrounded by urgency. To remain aware while others move mechanically. To maintain compassion in environments filled with tension. To experience movement without losing stillness. This is not indifference toward life. It is actually a deeper participation in life. Because when the mind is no longer trapped inside endless reactivity, one begins seeing reality more clearly. The morning sky becomes visible again. Human faces become visible again. Small moments become meaningful again. Life is no longer reduced to rushing unconsciously from one obligation to another. And eventually, the commute itself changes meaning completely. What was once seen only as stress becomes training. What was once viewed as interruption becomes practice. The road itself becomes part of the spiritual path. This understanding carries a profound message for modern humanity. The world may continue accelerating. Technology may continue demanding more attention. Cities may continue growing louder and more crowded. Schedules may continue tightening. The external speed of life may never truly slow down again. But inner awareness does not need to follow that speed. A human being can still remain awake. A human being can still remain balanced. A human being can still remain free internally even while surrounded by movement externally. This is the hidden power of mindfulness. Not escaping the world, but learning how to live within the world without becoming psychologically imprisoned by it. So tomorrow morning, when the alarm rings, when the traffic begins, when the crowds gather, when impatience starts appearing in the mind, perhaps there can be a small moment of remembering. A pause. A breath. A return to awareness. Not because the commute has become easier, but because consciousness itself is beginning to awaken within the commute. And perhaps that is the real destination after all. Not the office. Not the station. Not the end of the road. But the return to presence, again and again, in the middle of ordinary life.